Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Table Talk, a monthly intergenerational conversation regarding environmental racism from the Black and Latinx experience. My name is Wawa, and I am the co-host of the Green Table Talk. I'm also the founder of BlackGirlEnvironmentalist. Before we start, I want to give thanks to the folks that have made this conversation possible. Black Millennials for Flint, Corazon Latino, Environmental Defense Fund, and Black Girl Environmentalist.
Hello, my name is Felipe Benitez and I'm Executive Director of Corazon Latino. We are an organization that seeks to reconnect Latino and communities of color with nature. We believe in reciprocity between nature and humans. If we take care of nature, nature will take care of us. Today, I am humbled. I am honored to be joining the Green Table Talk, an initiative by Black Millennials for Flint, Young, Gifted, and Green, and the Environmental Defense Fund. This is a great opportunity to bring Black and Brown communities together and really work together, leading with love, leading with courage, leading with the best of our communities. We need to break this vicious cycle that puts or confronts our communities against each other, or thinking that there's a sum zero, whatever they gain, it's our loss, or vice versa. Together, we can achieve more. Together, we can win. We need to learn from each other. We need to support each other. We need to love each other. This is why I'm truly honored to be sharing this space with Wawa. Let me remind you that the future, the present is female. The present is Black and Brown. Y por eso, quiero darles las gracias por dejarme ser parte de este espacio. Today, I'm proud to present you our padrino, our godfather, Congressman Raul Grijalva.
Hello, I'm Raul Grijalva, Chair of the House Committee on Natural Resources. Thank you to the Black Millennials for Flint for the invitation to speak with you today. I want to take this moment to congratulate Latricia Adams on her new role as a member of President Biden's White House Environmental Justice Advisory Committee. Latricia has been a pillar of strength for the Environmental Justice Initiative and for the Environmental Justice for All Act. The White House is lucky to have you, Latricia, and we all appreciate the awareness you're going to bring to that very important role. President Biden has presented a $2 trillion infrastructure package to the American people. The President's commitment that 40% of the benefits will go to communities of color is significant, and this benchmark will require support and advocacy on our part. We agree that these benefits need to take a practical, tangible form. Black and Brown communities need investments in coastal resilience, clean water infrastructure, zero-emission vehicles, air monitoring, and much, much more. These investments should be based on the awareness of current local needs as well as an understanding of the historic injustice these communities have suffered. Democrats in the House, the Senate, and the Biden administration have an opportunity, and I think an obligation, to engage communities of color and gather information to guide public policy. That's why I and my friends Representative McEachin and Senator Duckworth are continuing to gather feedback on the Environmental Justice for All Act. Last Congress, we heard very clearly the needs to address cumulative impacts in permitting decisions and revise the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to allow for personal right to action. President Biden has dedicated his administration to an all-of-the-government approach to environmental injustice. This new advisory council, led by 26 environmental justice leaders from across the country, will have a lot to do over the next several years and hopefully beyond. Congress is still working on the right infrastructure package, and that work will take a bit of time. That's why we need your consistent engagement throughout this whole process. The final product can truly serve the communities that need it the most, but only if we are out there showing what that looks like in practical terms and in real decisions. I'm glad to be with you today. I know we can do this, and I look forward to continuing this effort. Thank you so much for the invitation, and I pledge the support that is going to be necessary to move us all forward and to finally deal with the systemic racism, the systemic neglect that many of our communities have suffered over a course of many years. We have an opportunity. We have an obligation, and we have the momentum. Thank you.
Today, we'll be discussing President Biden's infrastructure plan with two esteemed environmental justice advocates, Ayanna Alberti and Jonathan Garza. So if Ayana, you could introduce yourself so that our audience could get to know you a little bit better.
Yes, thank you for that introduction, Wawa, and I'm really glad to be here. So my name is Ayana Albertini-Fleurant. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as an advocate for transformative approaches to solving the environmental crises that disproportionately impact Black and Brown people. So currently, I serve as co-executive director for the young Black woman-led nonprofit Generation Green, where I, along with some others, synthesized the term environmental liberation to describe a holistic framework that allows us to tackle Black liberation, climate justice, and environmental justice together. So Generation Green strives to foster an intergenerational network, community, and platform that fortifies youth leadership in the environmental liberation movement throughout the African diaspora.
Thank you so much, Ayana. So we're going to jump right into our next speaker, Jonathan. So Jonathan, if you could introduce yourself for us.
Sure. Thank you, Wawa. Thank you, Felipe. And thank you, Black Millennials for Flint, for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Jonathan Garza. I am professional staff. I serve Chairman Grijalva of the House Committee on Natural Resources. And for the last 2.5 years, I have served Chairman Grijalva to amplify and progress his environmental justice initiative, which is a partnership between himself, Representative McEachin, was Senator Harris at the time, but now Vice President Harris, and now Senator Duckworth, who is championing the Environmental Justice for All Act on the Senate side. So for the last 2.5 years, we have developed an innovative legislative process which championed completely changing the legislative process to involve environmental justice communities at the very beginning of the process so that they themselves can create the bill product and have a voice in the actual bill making process, which is completely innovative and completely different than any other representative has ever created a bill. So we did that by ensuring that we reached out to environmental justice communities on the onset, brought them in so that they can comment on the actual bill itself and do line by line edits. So everyday community members were able to offer feedback and their voice was actually reflected in the final bill product. That was during the 116th Congress. Now during the 117th Congress, we're continuing to push and progress the Environmental Justice for All Act and ensure that environmental justice communities have a voice at the table and to elevate, thank goodness that the Biden administration has made environmental justice a priority for their platform, but ensure that environmental justice communities continue to have a voice in that process and moving forward. And thank you very much.
Jonathan, I really want to elaborate on what you discussed on how in this process that was started obviously by champions like Congressman Grijalva in the last Congress, but as you rightly mentioned, that was introduced this notion by or this proposal by President Biden about an infrastructure plan. And there's a lot of great talk about green jobs, about investing in our communities to take advantage of these newly created or these jobs that will be newly created. How do we make sure that we don't get the short end of the stick, that this is a real good paying jobs, pays that give us not just a minimum wage, but actually become an opportunity for progress, an opportunity for prosperity and the well-being of our communities?
Thank you very much, Felipe, for the question. And yes, the infrastructure package that the Biden administration presented is going to be absolutely enormous. And we have the immense benefit that the Biden administration has dedicated that 40% through their Justice 40 initiative. 40% of the benefits, not the investments, but the benefits would go to environmental justice communities and communities of color. Because as we both know, communities of color, Black, Latino, and Native communities have always been disenfranchised, and they are going to receive the brunt end of the climate crisis. So the way that we ensure that Black, Latino, and Native communities do not get the short end of the stick is to make sure that they are part of the conversation throughout the entire process. And what Chair Grijalva has done well with his process is we have created the model by having communities actually comment first. We did that with the Congressional Convening on Environmental Justice. We created the principles, which was created by the Environmental Justice Working Group. And then that went to a one draft of the bill. And then that went to the final draft of the bill, where communities were able to comment, communicate, and reflect their views in that bill. That's a framework. And the Biden administration, thank goodness, is following that framework that Chair Grijalva, Representative McEachin, and now Senator Duckworth created by creating by signing Executive Order 14008, which would create the White House Environmental Justice Council. White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. That's a mouthful, but it's comprised of environmental justice leaders, a broad spectrum from across the country, which congratulations to Latricia. She is a member of that council. So what they're going to do is they are going to advise and counsel the administration on how that funding should be distributed and administered. So ensuring that voices like the White House and Latricia and that council continue to advise the White House and the administration. That's how we make sure that Black and Brown communities don't get the short stick.
Thank you, Jonathan. And I want to ask the same question to Ayana. And I mean, it's a two-way conversation. We need to have the opportunities, but we also want to make sure that our communities are speaking up, are part of those conversations, and are expressing the needs and the hopes of what these programs or what this ultimately policies will look like. Would you like to comment on Ayana?
Yeah, great question. I definitely love a lot of the policies that are coming out of this administration, and I do like the infrastructure plan. I think that it's really, really important to have community input on these pieces of legislation or even executive orders that go out. I think that from a community perspective, it's really important for folks in their communities to get together with other folks to have and facilitate town halls where you can talk about what's going on in your environment in a very holistic way, in a way that includes infrastructure, includes jobs, includes food justice, transportation, and all those different things. And then after doing that and kind of getting an assessment of what's lacking and what's needed, deciding what those demands will be, and figuring out how to get them in the hands and ears of those who actually control decision making. And one of the ways it seems like Jonathan has laid out, but another way is also teaming up with some of the local community justice organizations that are already in your area, because a lot of times those organizations have been doing the work, have already built relationships with elected officials, and are able to elevate your concerns on issues of lead, water quality, infrastructure, housing, etc. So definitely facilitating more kind of conversation within communities to represent and elevate what your demands are in a collective way. I think that's really key.
You're so right, Ayana, and I think you really hit the nail on the head of making sure that we're uplifting existing community-led organizations, and hopefully we'll see in the next 4 years this commitment really pan out in more expansive ways. I do want to go back a little bit to something that was talked about with Jonathan as well, in regards to how there's going to be an increase in the availability of green jobs. And when we talk about bringing more Black and Brown folks into the green workspace, we also need to be talking about how oftentimes people will interpret these jobs as being low paying, or actually think about the historic instances where green jobs have not necessarily been super well paid jobs. And right now, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of so much social inequality, families and communities really, really need to be able to have access to well paid jobs. So I'm curious what you both think. How can we ensure that there is equitable access and pay for the Black and Brown workforce, and not just $15 per hour roles?
Great question, Wawa. I'll take that. So I think that in order to provide access for a plethora of green jobs, not just like you described at the entry level, or, jobs that are closer to minimum wage, but we need to also see Black and Brown folks represented in management positions in the green industries. We need to see Black and Brown folks actually owning the green companies, being the entrepreneurs that start these. So I think having federal support for those minority-owned businesses that are green, I think that's really important, because those businesses can create green jobs in their communities and really engage residents in working to support the community that they live in and making it more sustainable, actually being a part of that transition rather than having it just happen to them. So I think that's really important, because it reduces the dependence on just being a diversity hire somewhere else, and just it really cultivates the cohesion within your community and within that workforce. I also think that when we talk about pathways to green jobs, it has to start in secondary school. It has to start in high school. In high schools in low income neighborhoods, Title I high schools, you've got to have a curriculum that includes a non-whitewashed account of environmental science, of other sustainability topics, sort of like a maybe pre-vocational, pre-trade education. I think that's key, because in my own experience, honestly, the reason that I'm even here speaking on these topics today is because I was able to access an environmental education at a young age in high school. But that was because my parents specifically made sure that I went to a high school in a upper middle class, predominantly white suburb, really. So we've got to make sure that that type of education is accessible to everyone. And in every district. Right now, I am serving as a course coordinator for a intro to an environmental science and justice class offered by Howard and the National Education Equity Lab. So it's being offered to 100 Title I high school students across the country, some of which are in EJ communities like Flint, the Bronx. And I've just been observing the impact that having the environmental education, and then also the environmental organizing and justice tools, knowing how to do a community asset map, and having a basic understanding of environmental policy and who controls what in your community. That has been to see those students go through that transformation and to have a sense of hope that they can change what they're observing in their communities. That has been so meaningful to me. So, and to add to that, now they're beginning to have conversations about their career paths and how it can align with an environmental or sustainable focus. So it's really pretty easy as long as you introduce that type of education and the access to those trainings pretty early, and making sure that there's a very clear pathway to an environmental or green career at every level.
Jonathan, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Ayana, for your response. I couldn't agree any more. And I to give some relief to everyone watching, people are listening. I'm proud that Chair Grijalva is an advocate for this issue and diversifying the entire environmental movement that goes from the union-paying jobs to the big green national organizations. As we know, it is a clear fact that there's a lack of diversity throughout the entire movement, and when we don't have people of color in the boardrooms, in higher positions of power, people aren't going to understand our stories and what the communities really need. And so that's why Chair Grijalva had a hearing last Congress, in the 116th Congress, about the lack of diversity in the Department of the Interior. He's meeting with leaders to ensure that big green organizations know that they must diversify their staff, because we're going to need all hands on deck in order to solve the climate crisis and to create strong, good union jobs. And so Chair Grijalva is going to continue advocating for this issue, holding more hearings and forums, and making sure that people understand that someone is listening, and we are going to diversify this movement together. So thank you, Ayana, for your response.
I just wanted to add that green jobs is like a very abstract term, because really what does that mean? But it means not only, obviously, for example, installing solar panels or, I don't know, being part of the manufacturing of electric cars, which are the obvious, but it also deals with accounting, marketing. There's a whole variety of opportunities out there focused on the sustainable industry, on green, on the green industry, that anybody can be part. We have worked as Corazon Latino. We've done a lot of work with National Park Service and the Forest Service and trying to bring that diversity. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, nobody questions that, but I think having those conversations and making sure that these opportunities are met are key, and we love those conversations with high school students, with young people, where they can see themselves like, hey, I could be a scientist, I could be a financial expert working for natural resources or for a green startup. So there's a lot of opportunities there. We just need to be looking for that. And Wawa, I want to pass it to you.
I mean, yes to all those different things. And I feel so grateful to be able to be hearing all this insight from our panelists here today. And the other thing that I want to talk about is, shifting gears just a little bit. So this past Monday, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders introduced the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act, which would provide $172 billion to retrofit the estimated 950,000 existing public housing units, upgrade building electrification and water quality by creating 2 new grant programs to achieve carbon neutrality in the U.S. public housing through workforce development and construction. So what do y'all think? Do you think that the Green New Deal for public housing should be passed? And what type of impact would an act like this have on the communities that we care so much about?
So I'd like to say that I am really excited by the provisions in the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act. I really appreciate how it takes a holistic approach to addressing the public housing crises. And it really looks at the families and individuals that are living in public housing. It looks at the ecosystem that's surrounding them, right? Like, what are the jobs available? Okay, what are the environmental issues present? How can we, foster community within public housing? So I really appreciate that. I think the provisions in this bill really represent, or a lot of Generation Green's policy priorities when it comes to community access and housing are reflected in this act. And outside of making sure that housing is safe and habitable, I think that some of my favorite pieces in the bill are on the renewable energy generation. I think that's super cool, like having public housing being energy kind of like self-sufficient, and having that be clean and green and carbon neutral. I think that's amazing. Also, investment in resident operated community businesses near public housing. I think that's really important and goes back to what we were discussing earlier about, like having federal support for community-led businesses and green companies and other, other institutions and entities that actually serve the community and are community operated. And I really appreciate the unionized labor standards that is required by the bill. So I think all of these things really nurture a sense of community control, which is vital for the survival of Black and Brown people after decades of us, being dumped on and redlined and displaced and sacrificed and forgotten. It's important that we have that community control back, and housing is at the core of it, right? It's at the core. But it's not the only thing. So I appreciate that this bill pulls in some of those other pieces that just goes along with, how folks live and, how they can thrive no matter where they live.
Thank you, Wawa, for the question, and thank you, Ayana, for your response as well. From where our starting point is, we have a lot of work to do, and we need bold change and aggressive action to turn back time on the environmental racism that has occurred in our country. And in order to step things forward, I do have some good news that I know your audience members and Ayana, you'd be excited to hear. In the 116th Congress, Representative McEachin authored a letter, and Chair Grijalva was a co-sponsor of that letter, requesting an increase in the Low-Income Housing Energy Assistance Program, or called also LIHEAP, and also the Water Bill Debt Relief Program. And I have some great news that when the CARES Act package passed, that LIHEAP funding was increased to $900 million, which is a great step in the right direction. And the water bill debt relief, $638 million was dedicated to that program as well, which is an excellent step in the right direction. But of course, there's so much more work to be done. There's so much we need to do together, and there's so much more we're going to need the community's help on to address all these issues.
And we're very thankful for your time. We have a little bit of at least two more questions to ask. And I want to start with something that still baffles my mind. I mean, after what we've seen in back in February in Houston, or we see a couple of years ago, Hurricane Maria, fires. I mean, our Earth, our Madre Tierra is screaming at us. Climate change is real. However, sometimes we hear some deniers out there saying like, well, it's not that, it's, you know how it is. From your experience, Jonathan and Ayana, if you were in a one-on-one conversation, what would you say to a climate denier? How would you try to at least move or at least make them reflect about their position? Jonathan, you want to go first?
Thank you, Felipe. And to that, I say that we're living with the reality that the climate crisis is going to be in everyone's homes. It's going to be in everyone's communities. And while the people who are voicing their dissent, I feel, are the loudest, I truly feel that they are becoming the minority now, because a majority of Americans believe in the climate crisis. They believe that we want to do something. Climate change was an issue during this past election. And even if you go into to individual people in the communities, I would say, go talk to a farmer in Iowa. Go talk to a farmer in the panhandle of Florida. Go talk to a worker in Montana or Minnesota. The farmers and the people who are experiencing these issues on the ground, or excuse me, wildfires in California, my home. Talk to them. Even conservative, Republican leaning constituents will tell you this is the worst storm I've seen in my entire life, and it's getting worse every single year. I lost my farm. I lost my crop. If this happens another 2 years, I'm going to go bankrupt. That's the climate reality we are dealing with. And while the talking heads are good at trying to spin and trying to tell people that this doesn't exist, if you talk to real day Americans, they're going to tell you that this is the reality they're living with.
Ayana, would love your thoughts.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jonathan. I think that most Americans, most folks who are in frontline communities absolutely recognize the impacts and effects of climate change, even as early as now, live through them. So they have that lived experience to contribute to the conversation. And I think that, a lot of the folks that are hardcore climate deniers, a lot of times those folks are choosing to remain blissfully ignorant about climate change because it's in their economic interest, truthfully. So I wouldn't really waste my time going back and forth with someone that chooses to, not regard climate science for those reasons. But for everyone else, for those who may just simply not understand or not kind of connect how everyday phenomena is being exacerbated by climate change, I think that incidents of extreme weather events and extreme heat and all these other climate impacts need to be highlighted as part of a larger system, right, of human-induced climate change, and the impacts need to be clear. And then from there, I think communities will be able to really take a stand and to decide, what their communities need to be resilient to the impacts they're already feeling, honestly.
So thank you both for your insights. I think both of you are also getting to the point that our communities of color, Black and Brown communities, we do care about climate change. And oftentimes there is this narrative that we don't care, perhaps because we aren't as visible within conventional environmental spaces. But we know amongst our communities, amongst our loved ones, amongst our families, that we really care and want to make sure that our children and future generations have access to the things that allow us to have healthy, prosperous lives. So something that I often think about is what angle should, say, the Biden-Harris administration take to make sure that they are centering our voices, and what do you think that our communities can do to push them forward to really make sure that our frontline communities are at the forefront of discussing all these different environmental issues on this forum?
Well, thank you, Wawa. Thank you for that question. And the quick answer is the Biden administration, Chair Grijalva and the House Committee on Natural Resources is already taking the first big steps to ensure that community voices are centered are at the decision-making table and centered at the infrastructure package. The White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, or WEJAC, has been formed, and again, Latricia is thank goodness a member, and she's been doing amazing work with Black Millennials for Flint. But they have public meetings, and they're going to continue to have public meetings to gather input and feedback. You can go onto their website; it's at the EPA website. I'm sure y'all will go ahead and share it. But there, you can go ahead and sign up for their first. They've already had one public meeting, and now they're going to have another one. Chair Grijalva, Representative McEachin, and Senator Duckworth, we were going to begin our public engagement process for the Environmental Justice for All Act. Chair Grijalva has been clear that the Environmental Justice for All Act is just the basement. It's not the ceiling. There's more to improve on. There's more to do with it. So we're going to be reaching out to communities through our commenting process using a public platform called Popbox. Any public member can go onto that website right now, look up HR 2021, and freely comment and give us feedback. And as well, we're going to be doing another engagement process around two very important parts of the bill, and that is the section on cumulative impacts and amending the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we're going to have plenty of opportunities. we're welcoming of communities. We recognize that we're a small group of staff, so we ask that everybody just come to us. We want your feedback, and no other point and no other Congress or administration has anyone ever said, we want your feedback, please come to us. And so with that, we're looking forward to hearing from you and from the community members who are watching, and I'll kick it over to Ayana to close us off.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonathan, for providing that information and giving a little bit of insight on what the administration is already doing. Yeah, I think that, just to echo what you said, having those public meetings, continuing to have them, continuing to improve the outreach, making sure that outreach is equitable, that it's in different languages, that you're reaching people where they already are. That's really important so that they can come and provide that input and that feedback. Yeah, I think that is key. And I would also say, you mentioned, one of the next comment periods is on the cumulative impact portions of the bill. And I think that, another good way to approach this work with communities is talking about being honest and talking about the past, like, what has gotten us to this point, what is the legacy of the environmental justice issues that we are legislating around, not just, how can we, provide a fix to what we're seeing right now, but there is a legacy associated with these issues, right? So it's really, really important to address things in a holistic way where you're using that critical historical and social analysis to do that. Even something as small, or actually really not small, as green space and, encouraging Black and Brown folks to be outdoors. That's great, right? That's great, providing more access to that. But it's really important to also acknowledge the trauma that has that just lives in Black people, especially when it comes to being outside in the outdoors, the racial violence that that happens outside, and the lack of protection from those who are supposed to be protecting us, but who are really upholding a system of violence. So I think it's vital to come to the conversation with an understanding of and just radical honesty about what landed us in these communities of environmental injustice that we're in today.
Thank you all for attending our first Green Table Talk. Again, please make sure to follow up with the work being done by our incredible panelists. That information will be put in our bio. And stay tuned to our next Green Table Talk. We love these conversations. And also, if you want, in the comments, let us know if there are any topics that you think we should be discussing in the future. Have a good rest of your day.